Ooh, we're live. Ladies and gentlemen, WeatherBrains episode number 857. This is for Thursday, the 16th day of June, 2022. I am James Spann. Thank you. It is a Thursday night special. We typically do this Mondays. If you are a noob, new to this, but we're doing a Thursday night special, and this is going to be the show that will be airing on Monday, the 20th. The podcast version, which is how most people consume this, is going to be released to the world on the 20th of June. But we're recording it a little early because guess what? I'm actually going to try and take a few days off next week. I've not had a real vacation day in about a year. And by golly, everybody needs a mental health break from time to time. And I'm very much excited to just kind of back off a little bit and just breathe. So I will not be here next Monday night. And since I have the ball here, if you will, we have to kind of do the show when I'm around. So we're doing it tonight. And by golly, I might be the only guy on the show tonight based on what I've seen here. So one way or the other, we know it's going to be a homegrown show, and these can rapidly be unhinged, which might be kind of fun. But a lot of people are out. And obviously, we've got a lot of people in Wisconsin at the AMS broadcast conference and the conference on weather messaging and communication. All of that's going on. Rick Smith is there. Kim McLean is there. In fact, it'd be kind of cool if we would have somebody up there that might join us, but it's probably too late for that. But anyway, that's going on now. So a lot of our folks are there. I did speak with Bill Murray. Bill is in Washington, D.C., I believe, and he will try to join us here shortly. I know that Neil has some issues. He might not be able to make it. I think Troy is traveling. Jen might not be able to make it, but we're going to see what happens here. And if it's just me, I'll just become a ratchet jaw. I will become unhinged here for a little bit. All right, so we have just invited the gang, and we'll see who will make it. Often the homegrown shows can be a lot of fun. We love having the guests. We have had some unbelievable guests on this show over the years. Thanks to Bill Murray, mainly. He's our guest booking officer, the GBO. But, from time to time, we don't have adequate time just for us to talk. And I think everybody on this show is very interesting in different ways. We've got obviously some researchers. We've got some, PhDs on here, some practitioners. We've got everybody in between. And it's just interesting to hear sometimes our perspective on what is happening in the weather enterprise. So here comes Jen. I won't be by myself. So again, we'll get one or two people on here. We'll get this thing started. If you're watching on the television side, welcome. Good to have you. We appreciate you watching as always. Here comes Dr. Jacobs, and Bill will be here shortly. Jen, how are you?
I'm good. I'm glad I made it.
Yeah, glad you did too, because otherwise it would be just, for a minute, I thought it was just going to be me, but here comes Bill. So the whole gang is here. We have made it. I would love to have somebody in Milwaukee at these conferences to join us. If nothing else, by phone, that would be good. In that, I would imagine they've heard some interesting things by now. And it's a joint AMS conference. You've got the broadcast conference, and then you've got the I forget what the name of it is. Neil, you might know the conference on weather communication, messaging.
I've heard some pretty great talks coming from there. Saw a great screen capture of you and Bob Ryan.
Yeah, man. Bob, listen, if you get me on a screen with Bob Ryan, that's a big deal. I mean, growing up, you tell me one day that I would be on the same screen with Bob Ryan, I'd say that you're crazy as a lunatic. I mean, that's when you've hit the big time. But Bob interviewed a number of, old timers, I guess, to talk about weather messaging and communication and things like that. And he is the master of it. But a lot of people don't know that he was the original Today Show weather guy back in the 70s before Willard. And Willard was working on WRC, and they flipped it. Bill Murray, you good? We good, Dr. Murray?
Yeah, we got a shooting in Vestavia in the last few minutes. Did you know about it, James?
Yes,
Okay.
I
just saw the breaking news.
I
So that's where I live.
The scene is considered just well, we're not on the show here. There's no active shooter. The shooter is in custody. The scene is considered secure, but the police, they're searching every room, corner, and crevice of the church just in case there's another shooter. There are multiple victims and apparently one deceased, and this is all, kind of breaking and but it's at St. Stephen's Episcopal. I've been in that building many times to do
Exactly
weather talks to either their senior adults or their preschool program. And again, that's just a sad story. But and again, I say this all the time. I'm not a journalist. I don't do journalism, don't understand it. In a way, I'm forced into that role because people send me things like this and, pictures of plane crashes and car crashes and all these other things. And you have to kind of feel your way in the dark on what to post and what not to post. But I'm trying to stick with what the news people are saying over here in the newsroom. But let's get this thing started. Because I know everybody's busy and we won't keep everybody here for a long time. All right. Both recorders are going. Here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
We're kind of a big deal. Come on now. We've been on the air here since 2006. That's a long time. 16 years and running strong. This is WeatherBrains episode number 857. This is for the 20th of June, 2022. And a little secret for those that are listening, and most people do listen, we're actually recording the show a little early. We're recording the show on Thursday, June the 16th, because of scheduling issues for next week. And I am going to try with all my heart and soul to take a few days off and spend just a couple of days just backing down and a mental health break, if you will. I think everybody needs that. The last scheduled vacation I had was the week after Christmas, and that one didn't work out. And listen, when you're in the weather business, sometimes they just don't work out. In that we had a tornado event and then we had a snow event that week. And so it is what it is. And again, it's fine. I am delighted to blow off a vacation and handle that. That's what I was born to do. And that's what I love to do. But so anyway, I'll be off next week. And so we're doing the show a little early and it will be released to the world on the night of the 20th. And this is going to be a homegrown show. And we're just going to talk between us. And sometimes these are pretty darn good. And Jen Nairmore joins us from Ohio. Jen, how's you been? You've had a busy week, haven't you?
Oh my goodness. I don't remember the last time I was this busy, and it's radio, but it's also tornado talks. We've had an uptick with our stuff there, and the weather here has been very active. I did something last week I've never done before. I actually went on a little tornado survey that was in the county next to mine. And it was a week, it was an EF0, but there's a lot of trees down with this. And I had talked to a friend of mine who had damaged them in her backyard. And when the survey came out, it was a little bit short of her property. And it's because they couldn't go back there and they couldn't see what was behind there. So I went back and took photos and sent it to the National Weather Service. I had my crew with me, my sister-in-law and my niece and my nephews. We all made it an educational trip of what this whole process was like. And we actually drove the whole path from beginning to end. So we could kind of see where the damage was. How would the National Weather Service do this? And I kind of talked to the kids about why they do this, why this is important. And so then we were able to submit our reports and our photos, and the Weather Service extended the path to encompass that property. And so it was just really important for me, since I'm collecting information for Tornado Talk for historical purposes. And we always want to try to do our best to get the record straight. It was really it was a fun thing to do. We obviously hate to see the damage, and you never want to see that, but it was fun to be able to teach that to the kids and to kind of go out and experience that and what have you. So then we had another awful storm that came through a couple of days ago, and the winds were just, they were something else. I had never heard the trees going and the wind was howling. It was really fierce here. So been hot, going to cool off this weekend, then we get hot again, and it looks like we start to dry out too. So it's been just a busy bee for me.
Yeah, well, we need to deconstruct all that. That's a lot of good stuff that we need to talk about here.
Yeah.
So let's see, Neil, you were in North Carolina tonight?
I am. We've got one more day of some brutal heat. I think it's going to get close to 100 tomorrow, and then it cools off. But it wasn't too hot today. Had a vicious line of storms come through earlier. We had a couple thunderstorm warnings. Was hoping I would get some water on my grass, but it was mostly just lightning, not a whole lot of rain.
And that's the way it works sometimes. We had the same thing here. We had a nasty batch of storms moving in from the east, and they just fizzled, and that happens sometimes. And I think it maybe rained 2 drops at our place. So Bill Murray is at a local hotel in Washington.
If you consider
DC.
Washington, yeah, to be local, yep, I am. I had one of my first times I've ever come really close to running out of gas, and Neil should have cautioned me, but I was supposed to get into Washington with 30 or 40 extra miles, and I ended up sitting on 395 for an hour and a half to get to the wharf. And
Wow. Wait, were you coming in from the south?
yeah,
That's the worst. Like when I make that commute, and so I've got an easy pass, so I can go flying through. But if you go and the lanes are going the other direction, the area between Fredericksburg and 395 is a total nightmare. And there's never any crashes. It's just people sitting in cars.
There's something at Anthem tonight, and I think that's what really caused the problem. Because the people trying to, all those merges onto 395, it just was terrible. So I had to bail and get gas, or I would have been in trouble. So anyway, I made it just in time. So I was like, oh, goodness gracious. A little too much excitement for my day.
I'm trying to figure out what this thing is behind your head back there. Is that a shelf?
Headboard of the bed. This is my favorite hotel in DC, which is the canopy that's right on the wharf right there. So it's my favorite place to stay when I have to come to DC. So
okay. Well, anyway, again, we're just going to throw open the floor for open topics here tonight. We don't have a guest, and sometimes these can be fun. And
it's a pretty good thing in the email, James, that Jen could probably read out, the one about our forecast bus, but also our best forecast ever. I thought that would be a fun one to talk about. I can't remember any good ones.
We can totally break format. That's the one thing about this. We can break format. We can do whatever we want to. You want to do email off the top, Jen, and do something weird here?
Sure. Let's be weird.
Well, we have never done email off the top, but by golly, let's do email off the top, because we can break format. It's a homegrown show. We can do whatever we want to do.
Letters. We get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
So yeah, the email that Bill is alluding to is from James Lewis, and he thought this would be fun to talk about. People often talk about forecast bus, and the topic of what everyone's worst forecast was seems to come up on occasion. Instead of that, I would like to ask everyone on the panel what they would consider their best forecast for a major event. Is there a major event above others where you really nailed the forecast in terms of event area, timing, impact, or do all the really successful forecasts sort of blend together? It's a great question.
Ooh. So
yeah, you
I'm
don't
trying
think
to see
about
if anybody's raising their hand right now. I don't see any hands going up on the show here. So who's going first?
Oh my goodness.
You go first.
Go ahead, James. They to me they all blend together.
I've got my top two. I mean, I'd have to. Number 3 is up for debate, but so my greatest forecast bust was in 1982. This was before Jen was born and Neil was born. 1982, and so I was pretty young. I had been working professionally for 4 years, and I was at the NBC channel, the main guy, the weeknight guy here in Birmingham. And we had a winter storm that was evolving. And typically in the deep South down here, your big bust involved winter storms. We're pretty darn good with tornadoes. I mean, we're pretty good, but we're really not that good with winter storms. And the problem is we don't have enough experience. We don't have enough analogs. We've not lived through enough of these things like our friends up north. And so, and again, understand we're working. Let's go to our NWP czar, Neil, 1982. We had do we have the limited fine mesh in 82? I'm trying to remember. LFM?
That might have been like the tail end of the barotropic model.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really. It could have been. I mean, the LFM came along at some point in the early 80s. But anyway, obviously it was a different era and a different time. And we firmly believed that the winter storm would begin that evening. This was in January, and we had been so cold. And Bill, you helped me out. You're our weather historian here, but as I remember, we were darn close to zero here, right?
Yeah,
Before
we dropped like a rock that Saturday night, and then on Sunday morning the temperatures fell throughout the morning. A few snow flurries, and we went, really cold. I don't remember, -6 maybe, James. Something crazy, and it stayed below freezing all day on Monday, and the cloud cover started increasing on Monday night as the moisture started to arrive. Temperatures were in the 20s, but you kind of knew you were going to get up to some problems. But James, my signal that it was going to be bad was JB on the weather radio talking about Marengo County, reporting snow and slippery roads. And so I immediately, went into action and said, look, we got to get people into work. We got to get ready for this thing, because, you could tell it was ahead of its schedule. And it was a terrible ice storm. We were iced in that night, and the next day it was like listening to gunshots go off as the tree limbs broke all over. We lived out in the Huffman neighborhood then. And, it was bad, and lots of power outages. Then finally we got a little decent snow. I want to say that occurred on Wednesday night and Thursday morning. We got a couple inches of snow and got to sled and have some fun. So we enjoyed that. But before that, it was a dangerous situation with all people stuck on the highways and trapped in shopping malls and stores, and also in strangers' homes. It was an amazing time.
Yeah, and again, I thought it was going to start that evening, and it started during the day. It was far ahead of schedule, and this was a case where everything went to ice in a heartbeat. This was not a slow evolving mess. We went on ice in a heartbeat, and people abandoned cars. And unlike Snowmageddon, which was 8 years ago here, which was my number 2. This was a case where people had no power. The weight of the ice brought down power lines. It brought down trees. It brought down towers, communication towers. And it was a crippling, devastating, catastrophic ice storm, southern ice storm. And people, would walk to shelters, and the shelter had no power. And some people froze to death from exposure. And I thought I was going to be fired. And I tried to get to work. And of course, there was no way, because at the time I lived 20 miles south of the TV station. And so they had to come pick me up in a helicopter. And it's bad when they have to pick you up in a helicopter. But I got up there, and we could not get off the mountain, Red Mountain, for 5 days. And it was pretty rough. A lot of the ladies dressed to stay overnight. They didn't expect to stay overnight 4 nights. And we were all cranky. And then, so that was my worst by far. I thought I was going to be fired. I thought, I'm done. My little 4-year-old weather career has ended with a ice storm forecast that went awry. But number 2 was the Snowmageddon event of 2014. And that was a case where we had a flash freeze. And I've had no experience with that. And for everybody listening to this show that does weather, the ice accretion process is radically different at 18 degrees than 32 degrees. It typically snows here between 30 and 38. That's what we have here. But in this case, we had snow falling in 18 Fahrenheit, and the ground was relatively warm. The snow came down. The snow initially melted, and we had a flash freeze. And I've had no experience with that whatsoever. It didn't cross my mind. And again, the roads were like a crippling ice storm. But at least in Snowmageddon, people had power. It was not a crippling ice storm in terms of the impact, except on the roads. So that was number 2. And number 3 is up for debate. But typically down here in the Deep South, they're nasty, bad ice events. All right, Jen, go. You've had time to think about this.
Well, in terms of I've busted forecasts a lot. I don't remember. I'm such in a unique situation because I do so many different forecasts, but it's mainly now casting. I mean, I don't do a lot of extended outlooks and all that. I just don't have time to say it. And so my goal is to focus on what is happening right now or the next couple of days, or as you're planning for your weekend or whatever it is. But just sitting here thinking in terms of probably one of the worst events that I had to deal with, other than the super outbreak, was late 90s, I think it was, in Kansas City. There was a humongous snow squall, and it caused a big traffic pileup, and they lost one of their football players for the Chiefs, died in the accident. And on the air on the Monday after, I did lives during that time because I was during morning drive time, and they had me live on the air, and they were really upset and were really kind of accusatory sounding. Did you know there were going to be snow squalls? And they were really in my face about it. And I mentioned snow showers, but then you go back and you're like, did I say it enough? Did I say the visibility could drop and all that? So that was probably one of the worst feelings I ever had on the air, of whether or not I really, could I have said something more? And then you have to go back and you're like, I can't be in the car with everybody to try to tell them, that your visibility is about to drop, especially when you're dealing with a snow squall. In terms of the best forecast, I don't know about that either, because it's just a short term. But back in 2012, there was the derecho that went through Virginia and went through Lynchburg area, and our radio station there for years, like he kept telling, he's like, you did such a great job with that, keeping us informed of where, how bad it was going to be, how strong the winds were going to be, and all that kind of stuff. And so that's one event that popped in my mind, and it's those type of wind events, some of the heavy rain events, that if we can, at least in a now casting way, or, a couple of days heads up, if we can let people know, hey, things could get really, really snarly, and try to get them to be able to prepare. But I really appreciated the kudos on the derecho event. And that's my story.
All right, Bill Murray, and then we'll go to Neil next. Bill, go.
If you had to think of the worst, there's so many, little misses here and there that, luckily I haven't ever had a really big one, but you miss plenty of opportunities. One of my favorite stories when I was on television is one of my friends called up and said, I'm sitting on the interstate, with the windshield wipers going, sitting in your sunny with a high of 85 today, when an unexpected illegal shower popped up. When you think about the best forecasts, I think back to that Center Point tornado, James, in 2012. I think we really did a good job early that Sunday evening telling people there were going to be problems, and I remember that. And of course, the super outbreak, that was kind of like shooting fish in a barrel, though. But we were talking about that a week out. And when I was on television, the 93 superstorm was kind of fun to forecast way out, because everybody thought we were crazy, that we were sitting at 80 degrees on Monday afternoon, and that we would have 13 inches of snow on the ground by Saturday morning. And it pretty much did what we told everybody it was going to do, even blew those expectations out of the water. So it wasn't a fun event, because everybody was out of power, and it was a catastrophic event. I went into it hoping we would have a fun snow, and make snowmen and s'mores and have a good time, but it was not that at all. It was a life-threatening situation, and a bad experience in Alabama for a lot of people.
All right. So, Neil, you're not paid to forecast the weather, I guess, but you maybe have some stories. Come on. I don't care at what level you are. At some point, you're going to have to crank out a forecast for somebody somewhere.
Oh, yeah. So I can maybe let me hit the bust first. So I think the biggest bust was the January 2000 blizzard in the Raleigh-Durham area, where RDU ended up getting about almost 2 feet of snow. And I was I was about a year into my PhD at NC State, and I remember I lived about 2 blocks from the forecast office, and my roommate was working over at the forecast office. And we kept looking at the forecast, and the forecast was for like 3 to 4 inches of snow. And we'd run outside with a ruler, and there'd be like 6 or 7 inches on the ground. And then we'd run back inside and look, and the forecast had been updated to like 8 to 10 inches. And we'd run outside with a ruler, and there's 14 inches on the ground. And they were playing catch up the whole time. And I remember it was like a day or two later, we were out of power for a while. So probably maybe it was like a week later, my PhD advisor, Gary Lackman, was like, you're still looking for a problem to do your dissertation on. Why don't you do it on what went wrong in the models here? And I was at the department about the same time that Mike Brennan was there. And so both of us looked at the problem from 2 different directions. Mike looked at it from a potential vorticity from some latent heat release from some precipitation over the southeast states that ended up propagating over to the coast off Cape Hatteras. And I looked at it from the sea surface temperature perspective. And I think between the 2 things that we looked at, we were able to implement different things in the models to completely get the forecast right and figure out what the problems were. But it all goes back to, garbage in, garbage out. As far as the best forecasts, you can imagine I've been under some high pressure forecast events in my career, but probably the most stressful one was the forecast for my wedding day. That was supposed to be, the reception was outside, and there was a front coming through. It was early April. And it was like the classic, like really well-defined front, but timing was everything. And so I remember talking to the people. I was like, we can still do it outside. It's going to come through, but it's going to come through early. So we're going to have to deal with a little bit of cold air behind it and some above average wind, but the precip will push through. And I remember like that morning was like black clouds, and it looked like Armageddon, but it was perfect weather. By the time the reception happened, the sun was out. It was a little bit on the chilly side, but it was the timing. I nailed it within probably like 30 minutes of when the frontal passage would be. And then from then on, the bed and breakfast. So a big shout out to the Farrington House in Pittsboro, North Carolina, would call me up. And if they ever had an outdoor wedding, that was like a total like panic moment for them. And I would give them a forecast. And then they would always, if I ever went there with my wife for like an anniversary, they'd give me a preference for the access to the special room. But that was probably the most stressful. And then on the heels of that, actually, before Panasonic, I was working at a startup company, and one of our investors, a very, very generous investor, but didn't really totally understand the limits of predictability, wanted me to do a forecast for his son's wedding. And he gave me the date. It was like 3 months out. And I was just looking at the 50-year climatology, and I was like, boy, this is going to be tough. But, once we get in closer, T-3, 2, 1 weeks, I can give you a much better forecast. And there was some precipitation moving through there, but I nailed the timing on that, and he was pretty happy. But it's pretty amazing what you get asked to forecast for people who value and appreciate a forecast, but don't understand what the limits of the science and predictability are.
Yeah. And I think that's another question is, what's the most stressful type of forecast you have to deliver? I think maybe for me, it's some of the football stuff I do. I don't know if anybody here has ever done support for a football team or not, but it can create a lot of stress. And at these games, you've got 100,000 people at the stadium. You've got millions watching on television. And I'm not really a football guy. I'm a baseball guy. I mean, I was wired to be a baseball coach. In fact, I'm the world's worst football coach. Never let me coach your son in football. But, they have to wear the right type of shoes. They have to know if there's going to be a lightning delay. How long will it be? Will the kickoff be delayed? How much rain will fall? What about field conditions? And all of this stuff, they want answers. And understand, these guys do not want you to be wrong. They don't understand uncertainty. They don't necessarily understand the challenges involved in a specific point forecast 5 days in advance like that. So, and again, I'm glad to do it. I'm more than happy to do it. And in my old age, if something goes wrong, it goes wrong. I mean, it is what it is. But yeah, we've had some pretty high stress for football forecast over the years. So, Jen, what's the most stressful type of forecast you have to crank out with all your radio properties?
Well, we don't do it now, but we used to. We dabbled with doing the forecast for, like during winter weather, and whether or not people needed to come out and do the snow plows and all that. So it was kind of a moving away from doing radio. I did not like that. That was very stressful, because you had to have certain criteria, and they were trying to plan and all that, and it was really, really difficult. And so, in terms of radio, I mean, right now it's pretty streamlined. I mean, when we do some of the severe weather coverage, the stations are really great. They don't worry too much about us breaking into their sports or anything like that. They really don't have us do a lot for that. They'll ask us to forecast for, your local parade or all that kind of stuff. But right now it's pretty strict radio. But I would say that was the most challenging thing I ever did. And winter weather, just as a whole, is just awful to forecast for. What type is it going to be? When is it going to start? When is it going to switch to rain? And so it's hard. And it's hard to say that in about 20 seconds to try to tell people what's going to happen and when's it going to get there. So.
All right. So Bill Murray, we're talking about the most stressful type of forecast. I mentioned football. What about you? You got all these hotel properties you have to forecast for.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your most stressful situation?
I think it's when you have a potential tornado moving toward a hotel at 1:00 in the morning. When you're faced with that decision of whether to get up, get 80, 120 people up out of bed, to come downstairs. And you want to do it at the right time. If you do it too early, they get impatient. If you do it at exactly the right time and they all come downstairs and you're ready for them, then you have a big success. Fortunately, we've never actually been hit by one, but we've come close several times. Ruston, Louisiana, it literally went through the front parking lot 2 or 3 years ago. And the hotel made it fine, but there were fatalities right across the interstate. Alexandria, Louisiana is like a magnet for them. We've had several that have come through there. The one at the Colonnade is probably my greatest success story because the Cahaba Heights tornado, on the morning of the super outbreak, came just to the left of that hotel. And we gave them about 40 minutes advance notice, time for the GM to drive over there and get everybody up. And we had a delegation of Hilton execs there. And, they came down and went through the tornado plan, and the tornado, of course, hit Cahaba Heights, across the interstate, went up there. But that afternoon, they wanted to have a meeting, and we canceled that meeting and told them you needed to get out of Birmingham as quick as you could, because what was going to happen that afternoon was going to be horrendous. And they all vamoosed, got flights and drove and left. And they were so happy about that decision, because that was a harrowing night, afternoon and night. And they were grateful for that. So, that you get your good and your bad forecast. We rarely miss a big ice or snow forecast because those are impactful for hotels too. And of course, hurricanes. I think my most stressful one was, what was the M storm, Neil, that passed the Florida coast probably in 2015, 2016. We had
was it 2015? Was it Michael?
Yeah, it was
the
Michael.
one that got upgraded to a 5.
Yeah, no, that was the Panama City storm. This one was on the east coast of Florida. We had a hotel in Jax Beach, and we went against the evacuation order and decided to stay. And the police were none too happy about that. But all these hotels closed, and I was really confident in the Hurricane Center forecast, that it was going to stay offshore and not impact this hotel. And we advised, to keep it open, and it turned out to be a, many $1,000s, decision, because it took 2 or 3 days for them to, let the hotels open back up. And we had first responders and emergency people in the hotel, and they were able to get right out and work, and it worked out really, really well. But I was nervous as a cat that night, especially when you're watching those, spin up little tornadoes coming around the circulation. And they're hard to predict and hard to be ready for. But, we made it fine on that situation. But I just don't want ever our luck to run out in a situation like that. I know when Hurricane, James, you remember the 2005 season, I think it was Hurricane Dennis that was coming in. And when that hurricane was strengthening on Saturday morning, it went from like a 1 to a 4 in several hours. And when Jeff Flock from CNN came running in the hotel, we had a hotel in Foley, and he came running in the hotel and he said, "Bill, can we check out? Because we don't want to be here anymore." I was like, that's when it's time to close the hotel. When Jeff Flock is scared, it's time for us to shut down. So we shut down and moved inland a little further for that one. But James, if you remember, Brian Peters and I stayed in that hotel that whole weekend and covered the storm. And it was, a very interesting experience. But the most interesting experience was getting there on Friday night and hearing, the hurricane hit on Sunday morning, hearing this cacophony of frogs on Friday night. And we went out and did our live shots on Saturday and came back, Saturday evening about 11 o'clock. And it was totally silent. Those frogs knew that the storm was coming. And I looked at Brian and I'm like, "Brian, listen." And he's like, "What? I don't hear anything." I'm like, "I know, the frogs are gone." And sure enough, they were quiet as church mice that night before the hurricane. And it always made me think they knew that storm was coming.
And by the way, that's our working show title. Those frogs knew. All right. So Jen, we tackled that first email. Let's go back to the email segment. I think you got one more you want to read here.
I do. Yeah. Our friend Chris White sent us a link that we could get Dr. Neal to weigh in here, but it was a link to an article about the Air Force using AI to improve weather models for military planning. That's interesting. So do you know much about that, Dr. Neal?
Yeah, there's a lot of news coming out with artificial intelligence and machine learning and deep neural networks as it comes to predicting weather. And I think there's a huge promise for AI in the future weather prediction, but it's more so in some areas than others. And I'll give you some examples. So using AI for post-processing on the back end, and this is just a very advanced version of your MOS or diecast or things like that. There's also some promise of using AI to sort of replicate in the models some of the convective parameterizations and things like that. Where I do see things getting pretty interesting there's been some articles coming out recently that are talking about using artificial intelligence to completely replicate what a global model can produce. And it's true to some degree. I've seen these systems completely replicate the forecast from the Euro in fractions of a second. But what is sort of not discussed is all of the information that goes into training those AI systems. So, for example, if you want to have an AI system that predicts, it doesn't predict, it replicates what a prognostic set of physics equations would produce looking forward in time. You have to train it on 20, 30, 50 years worth of historical reanalysis so that it understands. So you back train it or back test it on this historical reanalysis, and then you just let it replicate what it sees going out forward. what people aren't discussing are when you generate these historical reanalyses, you still have to use your traditional observations and data assimilation and physics-based equations to generate the reanalysis to train the AI. So I can see a world in the future where we're using AI to do the predictive forecasts, but we still have to use the classical physics equations and the models to generate the reanalysis to train the AI system on. The other thing that makes me a little bit nervous is these AI systems are trained towards the mean. In other words, if you take, say, I don't know, 6 months, a year, 3 years worth of information, you're going to train the system to optimize itself around the mean. And the mean is not where the concerning weather events are. The concerning weather events happen on the extremes, on the tails of either end of the distribution. And unless the system can be trained on day in and day out weather, but somehow use that information to correctly predict these extreme one-off outline events, I'm still kind of nervous about it, because no one really cares if you can correctly predict the mean weather. I mean, you could look at the Farmer's Almanac and get that right. It's the outline events that are the problems. And those are the ones that I feel like the AI, at least in the short term, are going to really struggle with.
Well, Neil, what does it mean for the workforce? Do you think there's going to be a reduction in humans working at the National Weather Service with this AI concept?
I don't think so. I think it's probably going to create the opportunity for two new sets of humans in the loop, so to speak. There's going to be more people on the front end writing code and software and stuff like that. And then there's going to be more people on the back end, both interpreting this stuff and then also translating it to people on the ground. I think that I wish Kim was here for this conversation. I feel like as good as your forecast can get, if you get your forecast and it's some robotic automated voice telling you about something, you're not going to take it as seriously if it is a person, particularly a person that you know lives in your town, who knows what the weather is. And if you have a question or a problem, you can pick up the phone and call. And I don't see a world in which that goes away, because that's just human nature. And you can AI yourself into all sorts of interesting answers, but you're not going to overcome human nature.
Neil, do we have any of that right now in the NDFD forecast? Because they're kind of choppy and chaotic, in terms of the language when they translate out into the zones and things like that. The point.
Yeah, there's some automated parts of that process. And I find myself paying less attention to it now because I know it's built from an automated process. And at least you can go in there and read and it says this was automatically generated or whatever. But I just go straight to the discussion, because I'm like, all right, who wrote this discussion? I know that person. I want to see what they had to say about this weather event. And that's what I do. And so I worry that if you move away from that person that you trust and go fully automated, you risk losing, I don't want to say necessarily credibility, but you lose that connection with the community. And that's really important.
And that's what Jen does so well. She's saying she hated to, bog down in those specific criteria and things. But, even in that 20 seconds, she's, communicating uncertainty, communicating a range of potential outcomes. Don't you think, Jen? That's, that trusted voice is important in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's our goal, is to try to be succinct and use the correct tone and build the trust with the community that we're talking to. And, but we only have a certain amount of time to do it. And we want to try to get their attention while they're driving, to drop their kids off, or work, they're heading off to work or whatever, and really try to focus on getting that message out and as succinctly and as, So we try to start off with, like a headline to kind of capture your attention, so I may start off by saying, crummy weather coming up, or, start with the heat messaging. And we start, what's the big message? And then we kind of go from there to get the forecast. And if that means we can only get through today and tonight, then that was all that it's needed to be said. But if there's something coming down the pike, or if there's a holiday or something and we know something big's happening, then we may try to headline that as well to let people know what's happening. It can be very challenging, but I've done it for so long that it is easier for me, because I've done this since 1997, to try to get the forecast in. Sometimes I run out of words. I'm like, I think I've used all my words today. I don't have any more. So that's the really hardest part.
James, when did you start doing radio? Right off the bat?
Well, I guess
I know you did radio forever ago.
But I'm a product of radio, but I started doing weather on radio back in the 1980s. I was on Magic 96 FM. That was the first one, and it was great. I loved it because once it gets in your blood, it's always there. But I wanted to ask all of you here on the panel. We've talked about, AI and robotic forecast, and it's better to get your weather from an actual person, a human that understands potential impact, that understands the culture and all these things. But let's be honest. Most people, they're getting their weather. When you want to know what the weather's going to do, Joe Q Public, the guy in the Walmart, the guy in the Target, what's he going to do when he wants to know what the weather's going to do? Is he going to wait for the 10 o'clock news to come on to find out, or the 6 o'clock news, or Jen's radio? No. What's he going to do? Look at his what? Phone. Mm-hmm. And so these phone apps that are offered by most media outlets and private sector companies, they're automated. And I'm not faulting that. They have to be, because you're issuing point forecasts for a gazillion places across the United States. But they're totally automated based on model output. And so, where does that go? Will that get any better? I joke about it being crap apps, especially this time of the year, because they're giving a percentage of, you can't do it with these air mass random storms. But where does that go, guys? What do you think? Will humans ever be able to generate, forecasts for phone users with these apps, or is it always going to be automated?
I'm really surprised at how many people are putting the gospel behind these future radar forecasts. I know that's what you want to go to when when I really want to know what's going to happen. I'm going to go to the convection allowing models, and that's not going to help you with an air mass thunderstorm, but it might help you with the coverage. The amount of area that'll be covered. But a lot of like we've got some construction projects going on, and these folks are relying very heavily on the future radar products that some of the weather vendors are putting out there. So I go to, my weather model sources to look, when people ask me specifically kind of what to expect. And, but, most people don't have that immediate access, but I think they're increasingly getting it, from some of the weather vendors like the Weather Channel and AccuWeather and folks like that.
So Jen, how do you compete with a phone app? You versus the phone. How do you compete?
No, I can't. I mean, it's too immediate, and they're not going to sit and wait until the top of the hour to see if I come in with traffic and weather together. They're not going to do that. And so they're going to look at their phone, and I just, nobody is sitting there clamoring, waiting on Jen Naramore to get the forecast and waiting by the radio. I know that.
Oh yeah, they are.
Other than Bill, but and then my buddy Nick, who hears me in Tyrone, and he'll actually record it in the car. He's like, "It's Mom." So anyway, no, it's too immediate, and I just don't think that you can compete with that. I don't know how though we put more of a human touch on that, because automated is the quickest way to do it, and we've noodled different ways of how can we do more forecasts that reach people, through their phone. Is there a way that we could do more audio forecasts? You just can't do it for every single point. And if you're too broad brush, then that's not enough either. And so we've thought about that. Is there a way to do more audio type products for your phone or for podcast apps, or be more specific with the forecast? I don't know. I don't know what the future holds on that. Because people are going to look at their phone.
So Neil, what are your thoughts on these phone apps? Have you ever used one before?
I use Radar Scope.
No, I'm talking not that.
Yeah.
No.
If I had to choose one, I would choose Weather Whiskers. If you haven't had a chance, go check out this app. It's weather app for cats by cats.
I'm getting this. This is fantastic.
It's pretty awesome. It's an app that basically has images of cats, and they're dressed in scarves, and sometimes they have umbrellas, and it tells you what the weather is. I told you.
It's too perfect.
You can invest $20-50 million in a high performance supercomputer, but you're not going to outcompete companies like this.
I am getting this right now.
The disturbing thing, Neil, how in the world did you find out about this?
I was at a startup company, and we had generated a global model that was outperforming the INSAP. And I got an email from one of my sysadmins, and he's like, "You think you're great, but you're never going to beat this." He's like, and they're probably making a lot more money than we are, actually. And he's probably right.
Wow. Well, again, it is what it is. And I guess for, regular situations, it's fine. And listen, people are going to seek out a gen or professional when there are tornadoes flying or when there's some type of really high impact, life threatening event. But during normal times, it's going to pick up their phone, and we have to be there. We have to provide products and services that people can consume on that phone. And, that's just a hard question. And for me, I'm just focusing on one area, which makes it kind of easy. But for the people that have apps that serve the entire country, you just have to automate. And do we know, we'll get off this topic in a second. Do we know exactly how this sausage is made on these apps? Like, all the TV station apps and AccuWeather. I mean, what are they
using? Probably not Weather Channel and AccuWeather. They're probably doing their own thing, but a lot of them are using the NDFD, and that's not bad.
So they're using the vetted NDFD data as opposed to the raw model output, because I've seen suggestions from both, and I guess maybe they all work in different ways. But you've got, in the way, for those that don't know, for the TV stations, most stations, there might be a few exceptions, but most just take the app from the two main vendors and tailor it for their use, which would be IBM, the weather company, or Barron Services. Those are your two main, weather box vendors, and they'll take that app and they'll customize it. But I would love to know how Barron and the weather company, they get the data for their app. And I would assume that's the same for the Weather Channel. The weather company obviously provides for them. And then you got AccuWeather. How do they do it? And in fact, I got about a gazillion weird radar pictures the other night from Georgia that shows this. It wasn't ground return around a radar site, but it was just funky radar data. But anyway, crap apps they are. So the most extreme weather that you've ever experienced in your life, the most extreme weather event you've ever personally experienced. Neil, go.
I was in Charleston, not too far from the coast, when Hugo hit.
Ooh,
and
really?
So I grew up in Miami, thought, I'm hardened, been through a bunch of hurricanes, know what it's like to be in South Florida during hurricanes. So went to Charleston, South Carolina, and Hugo it ramped up right before landfall because it went over the Gulf Stream, and it was I think it's like a solid Category 4. And I just remember one of the things that was different in South Carolina than South Florida are all the pine trees everywhere. And they hadn't had like a solid, decent landfalling storm in years. And it was the tree damage that caused so much trouble. And we had 14 trees go down in our yard, and I think 3 or 4 straight into the house. And I stayed there with my family. I remember we were in sort of like this inner room. We had like a basement, but it wasn't like a full basement. It was like a kind of a half underground room, and you could feel the walls moving back and forth. And when the eye went over the house, I went outside, and all you could smell was pine sap. And I remember looking up and I could see the stars, and it was crazy. Like the humidity was just super high. And then the backside of the eye wall started to come. And my neighborhood like backed onto this forest preserve. So it was nothing but trees. And I remember hearing the eye wall moving across that forest. And as it was getting closer, the winds were getting louder, and you could just hear like the crunching, which was just all the trees snapping.
Mm.
And we ran back in the house. About 2 or 3 minutes later, the backside of the eye wall comes over, and it was like another hour or two of just intense winds. And then I remember we had one of the trees went through the roof into my sister's room. And I remember we brought like this kiddie pool in from outside and stuck it on her floor because the water was just pouring in. And we were just filling up this kiddie pool and then bailing it out with 5-gallon buckets. And then we were out of power for 3 weeks. And just there was a house down the street in our neighborhood that had gas, but otherwise it was just a bar of soap, and you're bathing in the Ashley River and boiling water. That was it. Like I literally had to chainsaw probably a half a mile of down trees to be able to drive out of my neighborhood. And there was not a lot. No one really had gas. You couldn't pump gas because the power was out the gas pumps, and water was a scarcity. And then there was looters everywhere, which was a whole nother problem. I mean, it was like just dealing with the storm was not even 2% of the whole catastrophe. It was the aftermath that was a nightmare. But I had like a whole newfound respect for the emergency management community and everything they do in advance of a storm and everything they have to do in the cleanup after dealing with that, because that was so much worse than some of the other storms that I had been through in Florida because of all the trees down, trees through houses, trees across roads. It was just, you couldn't go anywhere. It was pretty debilitating, but I'll never forget that.
How old were you? How old were you, Neil?
I was like, what was it? 80. No, it's like 90 something. I was like
89. It was 89.
89. I was in like 10th grade. I don't know, probably like 15 or 16 or something.
Have we ever asked you how you got crazy about weather, Dr. Neil?
What's that?
Have we ever asked you how you got interested in weather?
I don't know. It was fishing and surfing. I grew up in South Florida doing a lot of fly fishing on the flats and the Keys and the mangroves. And you really got to know the weather forecast to do that. And between that and surfing, it was mostly just either winter nor'easters with the north or northeast swell or tropical swells. And so it was kind of nice. It's either the weather's either good for fishing or surfing, but never usually both at the same time. But I always found that I was looking at the DIFAX charts and then staring at that blue screen on the Weather Channel, and it would just scroll up whatever text information. I was the Weather Channel at one point just used to be nothing but a blue screen with white text, and I used to just stare at that and look at the forecast.
That was a game changer when that came about. We could see that weather on the 8th.
All right. So, Jen, the most extreme weather you have experienced in person.
In person. So I was trying to get the exact date. It was April 8th, 1998. And it was 12:20 or so in the morning. And we had tornadoes coming through. I was living in Atlanta and I had only lived there for a year. And I'd started my job at the Weather Channel. Before that, I lived in Pennsylvania. And so having tornadoes in Pennsylvania was very rare, especially up into the Wilkes-Barre Scranton area, although they've had several there, but it was just, I never experienced it. So this was a new experience for me to be dealing with tornadoes in the South. And sirens were going off, the winds whipped up, and it was really loud. And I was in an apartment and got in the bathtub with the cats. And I mean, it was wild, and I could hear the roar, and it didn't last very long. And so then now I'm wide awake. I had to be at work at 3:30. So I just went ahead and tried to go the way I usually go, which was up Windy Hill Road toward the Weather Channel. If anybody who's familiar with this area, I-75, 285 right there, northwest side is where the Weather Channel building is. And so I was trying to get, I couldn't go that way. Everything was blocked off. So I went south and made a loop-de-doop around and got there, driving through leaves and debris and all this stuff. And it was just crazy. And come to find out, tornado had hit right up from the apartment, like half a mile, and did damage to a gas station. It hit like a furniture store and just ripped up stuff and went right across I-75. And then I find out later there were a bunch of people at the Weather Channel on the 6th floor trying to look for it. Like, I don't think that's a very good headline. Meteorologists on the 6th floor of the Weather Channel. But anyway, they were looking for it, went right by the Weather Channel building. So it was same year. I don't think it was the same event as the Dunwoody tornadoes, but it was the same year. But anyway, that was probably the wildest that I remember, have a vivid memory of. But I was a little girl when I went through the blizzard of 1978 up in Indiana. And I just remember the pictures. I don't remember much from it at all, but my mom would. But yeah, blizzard in 1978, I mean, snow was way over your head. I mean, it was just crazy. You're walking on top of the snow trying to get places. It was crazy. And people still talk about that, but I was living in Indiana at the time. So, but yeah, that would be what comes to my wildest event.
I recall that night well here. We had an F5 that came through Birmingham that night, April 8th of 98. And that's when really television changed here that night. We did the aggressive wall-to-wall long form coverage that people know me for. And I got the green light. This station was 2 years old at the time. And when I came here, they green lighted me to do whatever I wanted to do. And that night we just stayed on the air for hours and hours. And we, unfortunately, 34 people died here. It was horrible. The death toll was just horrible. 32 in Jefferson. We had 2 more in St. Clair, which is east of here. But I know that the warnings that night, the television coverage really worked effectively. And everybody else started doing long form coverage after that. But that was a horrible night. In fact, I almost died the next day. A lot of people don't know this story. They wanted me to fly the path of the damage at the first light of day, April 9th, 1998. And we were just horrified. And we stayed up in the air for a pretty long time. And a little later, by mid-morning, the pilot, who I know pretty well, he uttered some really harsh language. And I've never heard the guy cuss. And I mean, that thing took a nosedive. And I thought, this thing's about to crash. And as it turns out, he was avoiding a midair collision. A rogue helicopter had come in without checking in with the air traffic control folks in the tower and trying to get, the first video of the damage. And he said it was the closest he's ever been. And this guy's been in Vietnam. I mean, he's an experienced pilot. So, but that was a horrible, horrible situation. All right, Bill Murray, go. What most extreme weather you've ever experienced?
It's probably, there's probably 3 or 4 at the top of the list, but I'd have to say, of course, the April 27th outbreak was, extremely intense and, came home to roost because that mesocyclone went right over where we were. And I think the most shocking thing of that was the very large debris dropping out of that storm a good 45 minutes before it got to where we were. Big pieces of insulation and large pieces of siding. And, it had to be coming from, 30, 40, 50 miles away. And that was totally shocking to me. The May 93 or the March 93 superstorm, I think that, was a crazy experience on that Friday night when, you had lightning and extremely strong winds and incredible snow. That was a phenomenal event. And then, then being, we were on the Alabama coast, but we, still had big experience from Hurricane Katrina. And I think the most shocking thing was waking up on Tuesday morning to see New Orleans underwater. I think that was probably the most depressing weather thing I had ever seen or imagined. I think probably the first really depressing one, Neil, is one you mentioned. I couldn't imagine the power in South Carolina after Hurricane Hugo. It just seemed hopeless. And I was in Alabama listening to radio reports and news reports, and I thought, how do you ever recover from something like that where the power infrastructure is so destroyed? So, what these utilities do to get us back online, is pretty phenomenal. But in a thing like that where it's overwhelming and, it's 2, 3, 4 weeks to get your power back, that's just horrible.
It was a wild experience. Like, I don't know how people did it. It was, yeah. I mean, 3 weeks goes by pretty quick with no power, but it was in the middle of summer. I mean, stuff's hot. You can't use anything in your refrigerator. You got to still figure out how to boil your water on gas camp stoves. I mean, fortunately, we were, my dad and I were always like big outdoorsmen. So we had a ton of camping equipment. So we had plenty of gas and stuff like that. But there were some people who had nothing, and no one could get in to help them because of all the down trees up I-26 and 17. It took days to get help in.
All right. So one more topic before we take a break here. And I know that we're trying to wrap this up early, but for everybody on the panel here, what is your dream job in the weather enterprise? Your dream job, the one job you would give your right arm to have, the one that you've always dreamed about, the one that you're working to achieve. What is your dream job in the weather enterprise? And forget all the obstacles, forget everything else. If you could just pick it, what would it be? Bill Murray, I'm going to put the pressure on you. Go.
Well, I always thought it was the director of the National Hurricane Center until I met Max Mayfield, and he said, "No, you don't want to do that. You just want to be a hurricane specialist." I think that would be the most incredible job. Although there are a ton, and I think any job in weather is wonderful. Any job in the Weather Service, I think, would be super. I think that time in the '90s when I got to be on television, James, if I'd known what I was doing, would have been amazing, because weather was, and television was still really, really important and relevant. I love doing that. But I think any job, I love the one I have now, just forecasting on the weekends and getting to do, severe weather on our blog. We have a really high traffic blog, and I love being a part of that. So I'm grateful for every chance. I'm grateful for doing this show. 16 years we've been doing it. I love it every week. I was just panicked tonight trying to get off the interstate to try to figure out how I could call James and tell him to delay it 30 minutes so we could do it. I look forward to it every week because of all the special folks we have, our own panelists, and all the great weather brains we bring on every week.
What's amazing is I love doing this show. I mean, we've not missed a week of production in 16 years, which is amazing. We've not skipped a week. We were like what we're doing now. We're doing 2 shows this week. One will be running next week, but I think that's pretty amazing. That's pretty consistent. So, all right,
you're the
Jen,
metronome. You're the one that makes it happen, James. Thank you for making the sausage every week, because you keep us going.
All right, Jen, dream job and weather. Go.
Well, I'm kind of dipping my toe in there now. With Tornado Talk. That really is where my heart beats fast. I love the history. I love the storytelling. I love the people. I don't like the damage. I don't like what happens, but it happens. And so, but I like telling their story. I like telling the stories of miracles, of community, the way people come together and they help each other, and that even in the midst of tragedy, there's hope. I love telling those stories. And I just think there's so many communities that are impacted, and there's so many stories to tell. And if I could do anything, and just no limitations, I would go buy my RV that we talked about a couple of weeks ago and slap the Tornado Talk logo on there and go to all these different places and tell these stories and just write and research and go to historical societies and go to libraries and meet people and just have them tell their stories, and because they need to be archived. And we're only scratching the surface of what we're doing with Tornado Talk. But if I could do that full time, I totally would.
Awesome. All right, Dr. Jacobs, what's your dream job in the weather enterprise?
Um, yeah, I guess maybe if I wasn't confined to the weather enterprise, my dream job would probably be going back to being a recreational inshore fly fishing guide, because I had more fun doing that than anything else I've ever done. But having experienced the weather enterprise from the private sector, startup world, big company corporations, NOAA, academia, I honestly can say my dream job and the most fun that I've ever had is teaching at the undergraduate level. I would love to go back to a university and just teach numerical weather prediction and undergraduate level atmospheric science classes, because to me, that's the most fun, being able to teach something that is what seems relatively complex, and seeing the light bulbs go off in the student's head is so rewarding.
Yep. Awesome. All right. So Jen, let's go. Let's do one more email from you. Then we'll take a break after we talk about this next one. So go.
Yeah, we get a few emails from our little friend Owen Isaacson, and he's great. And he had a question: what is our favorite season? I think that's a great question. So we'll just throw it out. So, what is your favorite season, James?
Fall, autumn. I don't know what it is. When I was a kid, I loved summer. I could not wait for summer. I love summer, the long summer days in the woods of South Alabama and Butler County. Nothing beat that. But that's when I was a little boy, and I'm not a little boy. I'm an old man now. And so just something about that first cool breeze after the first really significant continental air mass arrival, where the dew points get down in the 40s and the low gets down in the 40s, and it's crisp and it's refreshing. And typically here that comes in late September, early October. October is a brilliant month. The sky is so blue you can't even look up at it. In the morning, you need a jacket or a sweater. During the day, it's so comfortable. We don't have to deal with tornadoes. We don't have to deal with loss of life. Typically, it's just a marvelous, marvelous time. Now, November gets a little wonky. That's when the tornado season here starts. But for me, no doubt, I'm a fall guy, followed number 2 by winter. Summer ranks dead last on my list, thanks to what we're going through right now. All right, Neil, what's your favorite? Go.
My favorite is, well, I guess it would depend on where I live. So when I lived in Miami in South Florida, my favorite was obviously the winter. But in the Carolinas, I'd have to say the spring. I live for spring. It's trout season, it's redfish season, it's bulb season. I'm a huge fan of both native orchids, wildflowers. I love gardening. It's a time when the yard starts to look really awesome before the summer heat kills everything. And it's just, I feel like I made it through winter. I mean, granted, I love winter with the snowstorms and everything else, but I'm ready for spring by the time the end of winter rolls around. And then, once it starts to get into the 90s, I'm pretty much miserable until next year.
All right. So, Bill, go.
I got to say spring with Dr. Jacobs. Is my favorite because I just love the reawakening and the warm days and the cool nights and all that in Alabama. It's a good time. But I think I'm like him. It would depend on where I lived. I think I would have a different home for every season. Maybe fall in the Colorado mountains, would be fun. I loved the aspen season in Southwest Colorado. I think I'd have to be on the Outer Banks in September, for a passing storm here and there. It's just, lake effect snow, maybe in upstate New York in January. I would probably have 12 different homes if I had unlimited resources.
All right, Jen.
Well, and again, it's location dependent. But when I was in Georgia, I loved the fall because you came out of the hot and you moved into and you stepped outside and you knew football season was here, and it was I love the cooler time. Up in Ohio, though, I'm all about late spring because you can finally, get out of the cold. And it takes a long time for us to warm up here, but once we do, it's been hot up here this summer for sure. It's not even summer yet. But once you get into let's say late April, early May, it is amazing up here. with the cool nights, doing, your fire pit nights, and, great, just time for planting and all that. It's my favorite time. And it's just really being able to open up all the windows, airing out the winter dankness, and being able to really get your fresh air flowing in. So I'd say springtime for me too.
Awesome. Well, let's take a break. We're going to hear from Tony Rice, and we're going to come back. We'll do our picks of the week. We'll do a weather roundup, a tropical weather update, and much more coming up as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory maintains a very interesting calendar on their website. It lists a number of things, including birthdays of astronauts to astrophysicists, and some interesting conferences, many of them that are very niche-y. Mercury 2022, the conference on the current and future science of the innermost planet, just wrapped up in Orleans, France. And underway right now is Meteoroids 2022 in Huntsville, Alabama. The items that put a smile on my face most often are calculations of when named asteroids will make their closest approach to Earth. It's the names that are the interesting part. First, the rules. If you discover an asteroid, you get to name it. And the rules are fairly straightforward. 16 characters or less, not too similar to an existing minor planet or moon, nothing offensive, and it's got to be pronounceable. There's a few that are named for sports figures, like skater Johnny Weir and tennis stars Andy Murray and Roger Federer, as well as baseball's Jackie Robinson. Both Orville and Wilbur Wright have been honored with asteroids. And perhaps that dinosaur phase that many of us went through is reflected in Triceratops, Tyrannosaurus, Brachiosaurus, Brontosaurus, and Iguanodon. Stars of stage and screen have been also honored, sometimes en masse, for stoking interest in science, with each of the principal cast of the original Star Trek, as well as the Big Bang Theory being honored. Each of the members of Monty Python were also honored, and Asteroid 26858 honors Mr. Rogers for being such a good neighbor. But one of the most popular categories of names is music, honoring crooners like Sinatra, rock and pop pioneers like Bill Haley, Brian Wilson, Elvis and the Beatles, and even that little band from Texas was honored with Asteroid 22521 ZZ Top. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokey for more spacey stuff like this.
When the weather ball is red, warmer weather is ahead. When the weather ball is white, colder weather is in sight. When the weather ball is green, no change in the weather is foreseen. When colors blink by night or day, precipitation's on the way.
All right. So again, we are actually recording the show on Thursday, the 16th of June. It's going to be released on the 20th of June. So let's talk about what's happening. And obviously the heat is kind of a big deal for a lot of folks in the southern and eastern U.S. And Neil, what was your high out there today?
Oh, it was in the 90s. It's been upper 90s to almost 100 in central North Carolina for the last few days. I think tomorrow it's looking like 99. And then that's it. It'll cool off. I mean, relatively speaking, but it was pretty rough for a while.
Yeah, and down here we've been in the 90s, and we're going to get a little break. Like I guess Jen, you're going to send us out some drier air, right? When do you get that?
We get that really for the next several days, and we get cool too. Tomorrow night we're in the 50s. That's awesome. And then we're in the 70s this weekend. And then I see mid to upper 90s again part of next week. So it's really all over the place. We did get up into the 90s the past few days, and we had the storms. What was it? Monday night? I think it was Monday night. The storms that's when we had the strong winds come on through. That all started up in Wisconsin and Michigan and angled down, and they had 85-mile-per-hour winds in Fort Wayne. I mean, it was all that came our way. And it was pretty bumpy, but yeah, we get cool this weekend. So, and you guys, James, you get a little bit lower humidity, right?
Yeah, we'll get the lower dew points this weekend, and we might see some 50s here Sunday morning, which is like a major cold wave. Of course, the highs will still be over 90, but next week it's going to come back, and there's a lot of discussion on how intense the heat will be next week. And a lot of people are posting, raw model output, which shows these outrageous numbers. And but whatever, it's going to be hot. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It's going to be hot. How hot, that's up for debate. But about the best thing we can hope for is a little cooler nights and lower humidity this weekend. Had a pretty interesting MCS here last night that came in from the east, and people get all weirded out whenever that happens. Every year we have thunderstorm masses that move from east to west. That's fairly common here in the summer, but I always get, I've lived here for 75 years. I've never seen a storm moving in here from Georgia like that happened last night. There's something changing here. And I've
That's
learned
what
that
broke
people,
the 1980 heat wave, James, was a storm that coming in from the east.
Yeah. I mean, people have their memory it just doesn't work well often when it comes to weather. I've learned that, but that's fairly
You're just
common.
not old enough like us. We've seen it all, James.
Yeah, that's right. But it's just like, it's just strange. I mean, you know what? There are days I just almost do not even want to look in the comments section of the face bag because it's just rough in there. And then the other problem we have this time of the year, people start arguing about how hot it is. My thermometer's in the shade. It's in the shade. I've been using this trusted thermometer for 35 years, and my high was 109 degrees. Where if you look at the official report down the road, the FAA, the Weather Service side, it was like 95. It was 15 degrees cooler. But they want to fight. I mean, if you even dare to dispute their 109, they will come after you and start cussing, ugly talking language. I mean, people just get really agitated this time of the year over these numbers. And I finally just, if you think it was 120 degrees, then that's fine. And they send me their pictures of their car thermometers, and it is that time of the year. But so let's talk about the tropics. We have that little feature that's inland over Central America that probably won't make it. But Neil, what are your thoughts on the rest of the hurricane season? We got a couple of weeks under our belt here. What do you think?
I think it's going to crank up here soon. I think it's going to be above average. You got a climatological prediction of fairly favorable outflow in the Atlantic. Not a lot of upper level wind shear. I think you're probably going to see some development, particularly later in the summer. There's right around the Yucatan, there's a lot of warm SST anomalies, and the models keep trying to spin up some stuff. I think the last run I saw the GFS a couple hours ago was sending one up into the Gulf. I wouldn't look at a deterministic model with any level of seriousness out past 200 hours, but there's energy there. And whether or not the model actually decides it wants to turn something into a storm is probably secondary. But the point is, there's some heat energy at some point during the season. It's going to have to be bled off, and the only way to do that is through storms. So it's going to happen. I just hope people are thinking about what they should do now in advance and getting ready.
All right. And while we got you on the horn here, Neil, talk a little bit about Ken Graham and his new role and what's happening down at the Hurricane Center in terms of who's going to lead that this season. Kind of an interesting time for a transition here.
It is. That was that was one of the things I was thinking when they decided that they chose Ken. I think he is a phenomenal pick. My top choice. I think he's going to be amazing because he's a seasoned veteran when it comes to forecasting. He knows what it's like to work a midnight shift, and he's been there, done that. And now he's up in DC. He's going to have his work cut out for him. There needs to be some pretty big changes going on there. And I think he's a change agent. He's going to be awesome. But it was kind of interesting, the timing, because they just right on the heels of announcing that it's going to be above average season. Then they announced that, oh, by the way, the former director of the Hurricane Center is not going to be around the Weather Service. And I thought that might generate some interesting news headlines. But the honest truth is Jamie Rome, who's the acting director now down there, is awesome. And Mike Brennan backing him up. I mean, that's a phenomenal team. And if I had my pick of anyone in the entire weather enterprise to be like the 1 and 2 people down there, I'd pick those two anyway. So I think we're going to be in good shape. I'm not worried at all. I think they are more than ready to do the job.
All right, I agree. So strap in for what could be a very interesting season. And again, I remind a lot of people are saying, "Hey, I thought you guys said it was going to be an active season." Well, look, guys, the really big ones, the peak that hasn't even started yet. We got August and September coming up, and I agree. I think it'll be pretty active. Of course, we don't know where these things are going to recurve into the westerlies. You just don't know that, and that's the hard part of that. But everybody's got to be ready, and we'll see how it goes. So it's going to be an interesting season. All right, so let's go around the horn and let's do picks of the week. I'm sitting there wondering, wow, these nasty emails coming in. You know what was going on here? Bill Murray, the TV station, did a special report on this church shooting. And guess what's on ABC tonight? The NBA Finals.
Oh, boy.
So they're getting a taste of what we deal with in the weather world. I don't think they cut off any of the basketball game. They had a news conference at the top of the hour, and they took that live, and they didn't cover any of the basketball game. But I think people thought that they were going to cover the basketball game, and they were not happy. In fact, the nastiest email I ever got involved an NBA basketball game on Christmas Day of all days, 2015. Christmas Day, 2015, we had a tornado warning for the southwest part of the city of Birmingham, the city here, the metro. And we had to cut off about 40 minutes of the game. And I want to say it was Golden State and Cleveland. And about 40 minutes. But the warning process worked very well. A lot of people could have died with that, but nobody lost their life. The warning process worked. The first email I got after that 2015 NBA basketball game interruption said, "You should have been aborted by a coat hanger. Welcome to my world." So I hope our friends in news don't have to deal with that kind of stuff tonight. But let's do picks of the week. This is something related to weather. This can be anything closely related to weather, or maybe something not related to weather at all. It's just us. We can do whatever we want to here. So, Jen, let's throw it to you for a pick of the week. Go.
So I had the pleasure to be invited to be on the Stormfront Freaks podcast last week. I loved it. It was so fun. So that's my pick of the week. I wanted to promote those guys. I've known Phil for the past few years because we both started podcasts at the same time. And he's done just a fabulous job putting together this show. It was so fun. They make you feel like you're home, and great questions, very engaging. Did their game show thing and totally screwed that up. And I was just a doofus on that.
Welcome to the club.
I know, but it was such a great time. And so that's my pick of the week. So thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah, and let me just say, everybody's got a weather podcast. There's a lot of these things. We don't care. We want everybody to have one. There's no competition here. We're not in. It's just, we don't do this for money. We don't do this for hits or views or likes or shares or clicks or tweeters or whatever. We all love weather, and it's just a labor of love. And so that's awesome. And I've been on that show before, and they do a great job. And again, we'll put the links up on weatherbrains.com. All right, Neil, go. What you got?
So I'll get to my pick of the week in a second, but if you haven't checked out weatherwhiskers.com, you really should. If you don't, you're missing out.
But they don't have it for iPhone.
I know.
Stinks.
It's so cool. It's almost worth maybe checking out an Android, but so my pick of the week is an article. It's in WRAL, but it's probably in other news. It's new poles have been installed around the Outer Banks to illustrate flood and storm surge risk. And so this is in partnership with the Hurricane Center. They've actually installed poles. I think at one point they were considering painting some of the telephone poles, basically color-coded what the height of the storm surge would be above ground level where that pole is. So when people driving or walking by can actually look at the pole and visualize, this is what a 6 or a 12 or an 18-foot storm surge would really look like. And yeah, I think a lot of people take for granted. They hear the number and it doesn't really compute until they see it on the side of something that's, wow, that's 2 stories high. That's way up there. And so kudos to them for putting that out across Dare County in partnership with the Hurricane Center and the emergency managers out there.
Awesome. That is a great pick. Mine, it's the Cooperative Institute for Research in the Atmosphere, CIRA, and their tropical page. If you've not, and everybody knows about Tropical Tidbits and some of the other great sites. They're all great, but their tropical page is really, really good with satellite imagery, model output, and just a plethora of data. It's really well done. So as we approach the peak of the hurricane season, when things get active, that's just a good one to bookmark in your browser. It's the CIRA Tropical Cyclone real-time page with some really great data and great satellite stuff there. All right, Jen, what you got for us?
I did it already.
I did. You know,
you get
right.
two. You get two.
I get two.
I get zero.
No. What it is? No, I'm watching all this shooting stuff going.
Yeah,
my brain is like fried. Bill, you go.
Yeah, I take Foghorn, James. Just because I've had a day.
You've had a day.
We invited Mark Suddeth at the last minute tonight because the schedule change kind of threw everything out of whack. But he originally committed, but realized he had overcommitted, and so he's going to be on with us on the night of the 27th. I think that's right. Is that our next show, James? The 27th?
Yes, 27th.
Yeah, and so Mark Suddeth will be on us, and we'll on with the show here, and we'll talk all things tropical. He's of course from hurricanetrack.com.
All right, cool. And again, we're going to wrap up a little early this week, but at Homegrown Week, I love to just have a conversation between all of us here. But if you would like to get in touch with us, our email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. And we are typically live Monday nights. And again, we will not be live on the 20th. That's the week we're taking off. That's the reason we're doing this show. So the next live show will be on the 27th of June, June 27th. But some watch straight off of YouTube or live.bigbrainsmedia.com. But we know that most of you listen, and we thank you for that. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, thank you for listening. Have a great weekend. God bless. All right, guys. Thank you all for doing a Thursday night special.
You bet. I'm glad I got here. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I'm glad y'all are all here. Thanks.
Yeah, this is fun. Thanks.